Hey, it's man Parrish. I'm really excited because this is the first video that I'm shooting for this series. So I figured I'd start out with a good one. I'm going to do a David Bowie, meeting David Bowie story and give it to you guys. Let me make a little adjustment on the light here. Let's see. There, that's probably better. Anyway, do I look pretty? All right, so here goes. Back in 1970, I was about 16, 17 years old, and I met a woman called Cherry Vanilla, and she worked for David Bowie actually a few years back, and she had her own little thing going on. She used to play at clubs around New York City, like Trudy Heller's on 9th Street and 6th Avenue. I have a whole story about Cherry. I have a whole story about Trudy Heller's and all that kind of stuff. So I was a intern, which was basically free labor working for Cherry. And she did a show at Trudy Heller's on 9th and 6th. And I used to help her put her bags, to carry her bags, help her get dressed, all that kind of stuff. So one day we did a show at Trudy's, and Cherry said, somebody very important is going to come visit after the show. You got to let me know when he gets here and bring him back to the dressing room and just make sure that nobody gets in. I'm 6'4", I'm a big guy, so I was like a bouncer, I guess. So we did the show, and Cherry jumped off stage like immediately, ran to the dressing room to get dressed, and she's running around with her tits bouncing around in her underwear, pulling things out of the bag like frantically. I go, "What? Are you okay?" She goes, "Yes. He's coming. I'm like, "Who?" I didn't ask, but okay, whatever. So all of a sudden, Cherry gets dressed, and she's putting her makeup on in the dressing room, and it's a really tiny little dressing room. I hear this big commotion going on outside in the club. Now, this isn't really a club. It's more of like a cabaret. There's about 20 tables, a short little stage, and Cherry used to do little sing-songs with a piano player and read beatnik poetry and stuff like that. And Trudy was a big old lesbian that loved her, and she booked Cherry. I think she wanted to get into Cherry's pants. That's a whole other story. Trudy was, well, the kind of trip she used to like talk like this, how you doing, you know? She was a rough and tough lesbian from New York. Anyway, so Cherry said, he's here, run outside, go get him. And as I headed out of the dressing room, past the kitchen, you know, this is kind of like these kind of clubs where you smell the cigarette smoke we used to smoke back in those days, and just the grease and all that kind of stuff. I get out to the room, and these 4 or 5 people come walking past me, and I went, holy shit, that's David Bowie, my God. So I went back to the dressing room, I opened the door, I said, welcome. David Bowie walked in. If you Google Ava Cherry, she's a beautiful black girl with snow white hair. She was on the 1984 floor show with him back in the 70s. And this tall, handsome black man who later on, so I'll actually say who it was in a minute. So Cherry was like really excited. She said, stand by the door, don't let anybody in. So I unfortunately, as a Bowie fan, had to go outside and close the door with my back to the door. And there I am, you know, security guard. And Trudy Heller, this rough and tumble dyke that owns the place, comes up to me, she goes, Mavava. And I said, Cherry said, you know, she had drinks in her hand. She said, Mavava. And I said, Cherry said nobody can go in. She said, if you don't go move over, I gotta kick you in the balls. And I was like, oh my God, you know. And Cherry said, what's going on out there? And, you know, I said, Trudy wants to come in. And she screamed, leave him alone. You know, so anyway, Trudy left. The dressing room was very tiny. I mean, maybe 3-4 feet wide, 5 feet deep or something like that. It got really hot and smoky, and Cherry said, why don't you come in and lock the door from the inside? So I did that. And about 5 minutes later, Bowie and Cherry were talking, and Ava, and this handsome black man who turned out to be Luther Vandross. Now, Luther used to be a session singer in New York City. And David was working on the Young Americans album right around the corner at Electric Lady Studios. Electric Lady Studios is a a famous New York City studio that Jimi Hendrix built, right? So David said, why don't we all go over to the studio? Your show's over. It's too hot here. And they did a couple of lines of coke, smoked a few joints, and they wandered out. And Cherry said, get my things, get my things. So piled everything up, and I had garment bag over my arms and bags. And she said, I'll be there in a minute. And they, Ava Cherry, David Bowie, Luther Vandross, and 2 other people, you know, they left. And I think when they left, the whole club kind of followed them down the street from 9th Street to 6th Avenue, then up 8th Street, halfway up the block to Electric Lady Studios. You could probably Google Electric Lady and see it. And so there we were, Cherry and I, and got everything done, picked up her bags, and I think Max, her manager, was with us. And we left Trudy's, which was empty now because everybody followed David Bowie down the block. We went around the corner, we went to Electric Lady Studios, came in, said hi, we're David's guests, and just a minute, and made a phone call, cool to let us in, took us to the back. We went into a control room, and David's leaning against the console like that, and Luther was standing off to the side talking to somebody, and Ava Cherry was sitting down, and Cherry went in, Max, I went in, a couple of other people, and they were all sitting around, you know, smoking joints, doing coke, air kissing, I love you, darling, yes, you know, all that kind of stuff. And David said, hey, I just worked on a new track, and Luther over here helped me do all the vocals, and I did it with John Lennon, and it's my new sound. Do you want to hear it? And we were like, yeah. And you got to imagine, David's leaning over this giant recording console of like 24, 48 tracks. I would have known now being in the business, but back then it was just a lot. Those things when you see on TV, those recording consoles that have like a million faders, he's leaning over that, little pin spots are coming down, and it's a, you know, fancy wood panel studio and all that kind of stuff with a piece of glass, and then the recording studio. You know, we're in the control room, and he said, this is my new song, and it's called Young Americans. And he hits play on the tape recorder, and he's kind of scrambling along the board and doing all the faders and stuff. And I got to hear Young Americans off of the 24 track. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Look at this, I'm getting goosebumps. I got to hear Young Americans off the 24 track like when it was just finished. I mean, sure, they did a little more production afterwards, but I mean, how lucky am I? It wasn't even mixed. He was just trying to rough mix it. And then he played it, and we were all like, yeah, it's amazing, because it was. You know, up until then, this was a whole new sound for David Bowie because he did that Philadelphia funk kind of feel, and he wanted to go more urban black from what he had done before. So they were talking, and I kind of wasn't in that crowd, so I wandered off into the studio, and in the back there was this giant Moog synthesizer. If Google groups like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Keith Emerson would have this old wall of analog synthesizers that went up like 10 feet and was like 15 feet wide. And I recognized the synthesizer from a record I used to smoke pot to. It's 14 years old. It's called Tonto's Expending Headband was the group, and this by Bob Margoloff and Malcolm Cecil, and this is the famous Moog synthesizer, one of the few big monsters that was made. And as a synthesizer guy, I kind of like sat there and I bowed down to it, and I was a huge David Bowie fan, and I've got some more stories where I went to the circus with his wife and met him a couple of other times, but I was more blown away by seeing this incredible synthesizer than I was meeting my ultimate rock star idol, David Bowie. Well, anyway, after drooling on this fancy piece of equipment, we went back in. It was getting late, around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and everybody did air kisses and, you know, love you, mean it, bye. And we all jumped into cabs and went our own way. So that's my first story. And I'm glad you got to be a part of it. And I have a bunch of other things like this, including Freddie Mercury. I got other Bowie stories. I have a Madonna story where I was at Studio 54 and came down from the ceiling. I've got so many great stories. I managed Village People on the road for 6 years. Crazy stories and some heartbreaking stories. My mom was schizophrenic and I went through a crazy childhood. I'm going to tell it all. Well, I hope you like it. It's my first story and I'm so happy. See you guys at the next round, and thanks for watching. If you haven't, please subscribe and hit that little bell button, because if you hit the bell button when I upload a new video, you will be able to get a notice. I'm going to try not to edit these so you get the real story direct from my mouth. All right? I hope my production value is okay, and I hope you guys leave some comments, and I hope you like what's going on. I'm finally getting my book out. Thanks. Never gonna figure out how to shut this. How do you shut